Welcome everyone. And I see that most of you are coaches and most of you are from India. And I also notice we have some people from other parts of the world as well. So I would say welcome, good evening, good morning, good afternoon from whichever time zone you guys are joining. And we are really honored and very happy to have you guys here in our webinar. This is part of our endeavor to promote coaching in the world and part of ICF endeavors as well. So ICF conducts coaching week every year. This time it's 8th to 14th of May, and so this is part of that endeavor. And we are coaches, so we need some opportunity to speak about coaching. And what better than checking how we can build our own credibility as coaches, right? So therefore, it is important for us to, I would say, look at how we can build our credibility for a successful coaching practice. And there are many facets and dimensions of that. And today we have two great experts with us on the same thing. Frank Wagner, the co-founder of Stakeholder Centered Coaching, along with Marshall Goldsmith, and we have Brandon with us, who is the CEO of the Stakeholder Centered Coaching program. So today I'm going to invite them, bring them up, ask them a few questions, build them up, and then they will share their insights, and post that we'll open up the session for Q&As. If you guys have any questions, you can either type them in the chat box as they come to you, or you can write them down for us to respond later, whatever works better for you. So I am your host here and moderator for this. I am Inderjeet, and most of you know me. I've been in this space for last 13 years. I'm master certified coach from ICF and also a master coach with Marshall Goldsmith Coaching. So with that, I'd like to start our conversation with our esteemed guests over here. Invite Frank Wagner to come over, share a few lines about himself. That's the best way to introduce. Frank, over to you.
Thank you, Inderjeet. And yes, good evening to, I would say, the vast majority of you, and hello to the rest of you. My name is Frank Wagner, and you probably know the name Marshall Goldsmith. And I met Marshall in 1972. So I don't know where you were in 1972, but that's when I met Marshall. We started a PhD program at the business school in UCLA in Los Angeles, and became very good friends while we were PhD students. And then both of us actually, our view of our career was we were going to be academics. We were going to become college professors. So we both applied for the same teaching job that we didn't know we were applying, and the university decided not to choose. They hired us both, and we shared an office the size of probably a large closet, and started teaching. And then Marshall left before I did and joined a organization called the Center of Leadership Studies that was run by a gentleman named Paul Hersey. And he was the co-founder of Situational Leadership, which to this day is still sort of part of the foundation of what both Marshall and I do. So then I left the university a year after Marshall, and we became business partners. And for 20 years, we did leadership training. We did not do coaching. Well, the extent of our coaching was in all of our training, generally for very large companies like IBM and Citibank and Coca-Cola, we would be doing back then up to a week of training with leaders. And as part of that, they would get 360-degree feedback. And then we would bring in a bunch of other people, would sit down with them one-on-one and maybe spend 30 minutes to an hour helping them think through what they learned from their feedback and to build an action plan. And so, we might have thought we were coaches, but that's the extent of what we did. Then right around the year 2000, Marshall had really honed coaching in his practice. And by the way, I had a little bit of a vacation from being a very close colleague of Marshall's. I quit because I was tired of getting on a plane every Sunday night and coming home every Friday night. And I said, I got more to life than that. So I kind of retired from that line of work. But it was during that time Marshall became not only an esteemed coach, he became a best-selling author. So in the year 2000, I'll just say, might have been 1999, he asked me to design and train people to coach like him. So that's how I guess you would call me the co-founder of Stakeholder Centered Coaching. So that's a bit about me. Inderjeet.
Thank you, Frank. That's really very inspiring and interesting story. And I was thinking 1972. Okay, was I born or even or not? So most of us probably were not even born, or perhaps 4 or 5 years old, I would say. Yeah, thank you for that interesting story. And I really love the stories that Frank shares, and they're really very interesting and very inspiring, especially when he brings up some case studies of how he has coached leaders across the industries, and that's really powerful. And I look forward to some such stories from you, Frank. Thank you. And over to you, Brandon. So let's hear your story, please.
Thank you, Inderjeet, for having me. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy that you have shown up to take part in this today. If I have not had a chance to interact with you yet, let me introduce myself. My name's Brandon Mergard. I'm sitting here just across from the Columbia River in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. I've been with the firm for the better part of a decade now, back when we were launching our international arm. I was living in Asia for about a decade during my time here running APAC and EMEA. So some of you we have interacted with in the past. I do see a few familiar faces. I came in to start running coach training, and that's really where I got my start here in the organization. And along that time, I completed my MBA and graduated summa cum laude. I went on to finish my doctorate in business, and I'm a couple steps left from finishing my master's in research, but that is such a back burner concept to me right now. All of my research efforts, though, have been towards, I'll say I was really inspired by leadership as a contact sport, that report that shows the linkage between follow-up and actually being recognized and acknowledged as more effective. And so much of my research is focused on developing that and expanding it to see what are the true key ingredients that affect the outcome of coaching. And so during that time, we baked all of this into the coach training. Like Frank, just before the pandemic, I spent about 152 days on the road and thought, man, there's got to be a better way to this. And so that was when we started dissecting what we do in our workshops and making it more accessible and more online, while still retaining a live component where everyone is able to come together and practice. And so, the outcome of all of this is I've since become the CEO of Stakeholder Centered Coaching. And the primary contribution that I intend to make here is to augment what we're doing with research and development, both for the process and for our training, how we deliver the service and how you learn the service, as well as to more firmly establish the community, to be a community of knowledge sharing as we conduct research, to be a community of practice where we are growing and actively refining our skills together, but also a community of purpose where we are telling the world, stakeholder-centered coaching, this is what we do, this is who we serve, this is why it matters, and here's how you can be a part of it. So I hope we can share a little bit about that today. Feel free to engage with us in the chat as we discuss. And again, thank you guys for being here and for having us.
Thank you, Brandon. That's also quite inspiring. And so, friends, I am going to start asking my questions directly. And today's topic being credibility for a coach. So, my question to both of you, and any one of you can answer first. So, why is it important? Why credibility is important for a coach?
It's such a broad question. As I share my response, maybe you would like to share, all of you would like to share some of your responses in the chat. But why is credibility important? There's a number of reasons. I think the most pressing one is that anyone can call themselves a coach. Anyone can call themselves a coach. And what's worse is most of those people who want to call themselves a coach are going to be able to convince and influence potential buyers of your coaching that they are credible. And so simply being credible already will give you a competitive edge, regardless of your background, regardless of what you're bringing to the table. And so credibility, man, it buys you a lot. It's frankly not that difficult to be credible. We'll get more into that as we talk about the definition, but I'd say above all else, that credibility is important because everyone can call themselves a coach, and credibility gives credence to the fact that you are calling yourself a coach, and you should be able to demonstrate that you can do what it is that you say that you're able to do.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, well, the one thing I will add, because why credibility and why it's important is because it is a necessary but not sufficient outcome that leads to trust. And trust is how you're going to be effective as a coach. That's what opens the door for you to use your process, your methodology, that's going to help this person improve. And again, for us also, I should stop, is that we focus on one type of coaching. I mean, there's many types of coaching, and ours is very much laser focused on one aspect, and that's leadership. And helping a leader improve in their actions, their behaviors, and how they get others to choose to follow them. So, and that is absolutely enhanced if you have trust. And there was a famous person in our field was a gentleman named Stephen Covey, and he became famous and based upon his original dissertation research. And then his son started taking over, and his son has written a phenomenal book called The Speed of Trust or something like that. And so credibility is essential for us to be seen as trustworthy and to gain trust with our clients. So that's why it's so important.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Because when somebody wants to hire us, what would distinguish us from others? Like anybody can call themselves as a coach, as Brandon said. And and when we are credible, then somebody can hire us because they believe that we bring something on the table. This is the trust that we build with them, which naturally allows me to flow into a next question for us, which is, what brings credibility for a coach?
Inderjeet, your question was, okay, well, how you build your credibility.
Yeah.
And there's, again, probably many answers to that. I'll give you kind of what I consider to be the three major ways you build your credibility. And the first one is having a proven methodology in your coaching. Almost, I mean, as you say, there are some people that have no methodology. They just call themselves a coach. Yet most coaches that do have some sort of a reputation have a certain process that they've been trained in. They're often been certified in. There's a path they take their leaders through to help them. And I think everyone knows here, we have a methodology. It's called Stakeholder Centered Coaching. Now,
right.
Some people will always go around and make these kinds of claims like, we have the best methodology of any to help people. And I find it hard pressed to ever validate that anybody has something that's the best. And, what you can do is you can provide evidence on how well does your methodology work. And we are very fortunate that we have a lot of data that it shows that our methodology is proven to help leaders become more effective, not only in their own eyes, but also in the eyes of the people they work with. So that's the first thing is how clear do you have a methodology? How clear can you explain your methodology? Because, all of our clients, when we first meet them, are not clients, they're prospective clients. So I think, when you can articulate in a very clear, relatively concise way and a compelling way what your methodology is, that's how you start to build your credibility, right? The second thing is taking the time to learn about the person you're coaching. My wonderful friend who died last year, Chris Coffey, who worked with me from the very beginning around the Stakeholder Centered Coaching. He attended a course years and years ago. I think it was called Strategic Selling. And he found it to be immensely valuable. And I never gone through a sales course in my life and been fortunate that I could stumble onto it getting enough work. What he learned from this organization was, why does a client hire you or pick you to be their coach? And here's the two options. They decide to work with you because of what they know about you. And see, for instance, when you explain your methodology, that's not exactly you, but it is the expertise you bring. Here's the other option. They hire you because of what they think you know about them. And they had pretty valid research. And this was all designed around selling to senior executives. And the answer is It has more to do with what they think you know about them than they know about you. So, I'd say, to build your credibility, keep that in mind. Now, in reality, it's a combination of both. Yet, do we spend too much time talking about ourselves and what we can do for them as opposed to learning about them? And so, do your due diligence. Like I just was interviewed for a coaching assignment last week, and this is that came me from Marshall Goldsmith, and I'm one of 3 people he suggested this leader interview to pick their coach. So what I did is I probably spent about 2 hours researching this person, finding articles about him. And so when I did and by the way, he hasn't finished the interview yet, so I don't know whether I'm going to get this work or not. I will say one thing I did a good job of is surprised him a number of times by linking what I knew about him as opposed to talking about me. And I'll give you a perfect example. Remember when I introduced myself this morning, and I like someone put already in chat about, I don't want to divulge where I was in 1972. This particular individual has a spiritual or religious background of being a Latter-day Saint, at least in the common term in the United States, is he's a Mormon. And as a young Mormon, when you're a late teen, you often go on what's called a mission. And this is where you go out to try to, you walk around in a dark suit and you try to get people to become Mormons. And it's a real pivotal event in the life of a person of that faith. Well, I was reading about him, and he went on his mission in 1972. So when he asked me to talk about myself, I said, well, I was introduced to you through Marshall Goldsmith. And when I met Marshall exactly the same time you went on your mission. I just threw that out of the blue. Now, did that help him get the sense that Frank Wagner already knows a lot about him? Okay. And the final thing is, we're here to help as a coach. And I would say, and this is maybe a bit controversial based upon your own views of coaching, is we are there to influence this person. That's how we're adding value. And a good coach, in my mind, knows when to pull the person along and when do they need to push the leader. And that's that's both an art and a skill. So those are the things I think that if you have those 3 things, you've got a methodology, which they both understand and it makes sense to them, right? You seem to know more about them, and by the way, and their business. And you don't have to be an expert in the business, but you know enough about their business. In our stake, because it's know enough about their business to help them about their leadership around their business. And then when it is to pull them along a path and when you need a little push. If you can do those things, you'll have credibility. That's my view.
Okay. So, Brandon, we are looking forward to hearing the definition of credibility from you.
First, I'm not the world expert on credibility. That title is reserved for Mr. Mitchell Levy, who is a stakeholder centered coach. And I definitely recommend checking him out, mitchelllevy.com. He can tell you everything you need to know about credibility, but so much of what I've learned has come from him. And there's a few points that really help me box in what credibility is. And the first is that credibility is kind of similar to leadership in that it's not something you achieve. It's not a destination. It's something that you do, right? You lead people. That is a verb. To be credible is a verb. And so that's the first point that I think is worth noting. The second is that credibility is not static, right? Credibility has shifted over time. The definition is ever changing, and it will change the more that our cultural zeitgeist shifts. Credibility and what that means has changed. For example, we have gone through fluctuations in history where credibility was defined as honor, right? You think of the old Wild West, and someone badmouths your name, the only credible response was some form of combat or gentleman's duel or something like this. And that's how you were credible. And that eventually became the integrity era, where we were more focused on you doing you. And if someone spoke ill of you or questioned your reputation, the best thing to do is to just let it slide off your back. But in today's modern world, we are bombarded with such hyper-targeted, hyper-focused, and hyper-personalized marketing and advertisements that anybody can be seen as credible. It's difficult to pick apart who is and who isn't credible. And so if I were to provide a definition of credibility, it's three things. It's being trusted. Credibility is then being known, and then it's being liked. And I would suggest that it's even in that order. Let's say that you are lucky enough to have a senior executive land on your website. You have about 3 to 7 seconds to tell them, you're in the right place, and for them to trust that you can actually do what it is you say you're going to do. And that's where you overcome the trust hurdle. Then it's, okay, I'm going to spend some time getting to know you and using your site, just continue to poke around, read the about us, see what it is that you do, what your outcomes are, and then decide if they like you. And that usually comes through what many of us think of as a discovery call or a chemistry session. But credibility, I would really say, boils down to those three things: being trusted, being known, and being liked, and in that order. And there's a lot more that goes into that. Happy to unpack if we have time, but there's 10 particular characteristics inside of that.
So
Brandon, can I just interject here?
Sure, please.
Erin early on she was reading my mind, because originally when I was getting ready for this webinar, I had organized it the same way. It's really a matter of competence and character, and of what it is. And then, the last person we just wrote with Praveen I think had written, is credibility and trustworthiness the same thing? And
right.
The credibility is, I think, much more about competence, but it's not the same as being trustworthy, because trustworthy probably has almost as much as that's got more to do with someone's character. And the character of things like, are they a person of integrity? Are they honest? Will they deliver on their promises? These are all the things that make up a person's character. And that's just as important. But see, if you just have a character, but you have no competency, that's not going to necessarily make you a coach in their eyes.
Right. So Frank, that boils down to competence and character. Like, one should have both, and that will fetch you the credibility. And then again, I think it's all tying up. And Brandon, I must say that you have done a lot of research. So I think you are already closer to finishing your master's in research. So the way you were explaining the credibility thing, I was like, oh God, so many elements of it, 10 further subset parts of it. So this is quite a bit of research you have done. So again, to sum it up, I would say that what Frank said was that it's about a proven methodology. It's about your knowledge about your client, and also about what you do when you do, in the sense like when to go along with the client or when to push the client, knowing that's when you're actually delivering your service. Same, tying up with what Brandon said, being trusted. Obviously, the trust would come from your proven methodologies, from what work you have done in the past. And so that's the first doorway to, building the trust. So when somebody comes to know about you, they know what you have done so far, what are your proven methodologies, etc. And that opens the door. But beyond that, then you have to deliver, right? So therefore, there comes your research, your effort, your intent to serve the client. And that brings in the element of being liked, which is what Brandon brought in. Thank you, friends. So this is really interesting. And I'm really happy that the audience is also participating. Please share your thoughts on the topics we're discussing in the chat box, and we'll try and pick them up and see if we can add them to the discussion. Now, we have spoken about trust. We have spoken about, being known, being liked, doing research for your client, etc. Having competence and character. So my question is kind of now narrowing down a bit, like these are general terms for anyone and everyone. Bringing this whole thing to the coaching thing, my question to both of you now is how measurable results are crucial in establishing credibility. Yes,
I'll start off on that one.
Sure.
And I tell you, this is, again, part of the amazing wisdom of Marshall Goldsmith in terms of the way we measure results. But backing up, just talking about measurement is sort of like the scorecard. The one thing too is over time, this is all about credibility. The credibility of a process, the credibility of a coach is based upon their track record, of success. Now, how do you determine whether someone is successful? Now, in our case, we really play a background role in terms of our work. The success is driven by the leader and the leader improving. Now, the problem with measurement in our field and the way it's been measured through most of the existence of coaching in whether it's the corporate world or with NGOs or whatever, with our large organizations, is they ask the leader whether or not this coaching was successful, and they ask the coach whether the leader got better. Now, there's an inherent problem with those two measurements because of the bias. And there's a conflict of interest because a leader asking, how did the coaching work? Well, they like to think, well, I got better. So they think they define it as successful. There's kind of a bias that's a little hard to necessarily to say that that's valid measure. And then the same thing with the coach. Yet I know, at least in the United States and corporate America, when we first got started, that's how it was measured. Now, what Marshall designed was a methodology that said, no, it really has nothing to do with the leader or the coach. It has to do with the people around the leader. And that's how, we started using the term stakeholder. And so the stakeholder term is now, by the way, is a stakeholder biased? Yes. There's no way you eliminate bias from measurement. What you do is you create a bias that's maybe you might say a more appropriate bias. And so the stakeholders bias is, did this person have a positive impact on me based upon what they were working on? So if they're working on becoming a better collaborator or a better listener or being more respectful, if that person feels they're more respected, they are involved more in collaboration, they are listened to better, that's actually a bias worth measuring. So our methodology is totally based upon measuring the impact in the eyes and the perception of the people around the leader. You got anything to add on that, Brandon?
No, I think in the interest of time, you've covered all the bases.
So that's really powerful. Thank you for that. Again, my next question is an offshoot of this, and maybe Frank, you partly answered it, but putting it in a different way, and this is to you, Brandon. Why engaging stakeholders in coaching? Why should one engage stakeholders in coaching? What's the benefit of that?
Involving stakeholders in coaching, it's going to come down to, what do you aim to affect as a coach? For stakeholder-centered coaches, our aim is to make leaders more effective. And by definition, leadership is largely going to be a factor of people's willingness to follow. So involving stakeholders and centering your coaching around the stakeholders' input through feed forward puts them at the center of leadership. It takes this whole ecosystem of leadership and says, I as a coach don't have to be an expert at what it means to delegate and what it means to communicate and to resolve conflict and have executive presence. It says the answers are already in your ecosystem. My job is to help you mine it. It's to help you find it and utilize it. So by picking the leadership skill that a leader wants to develop and then hiring an expert to work behind closed doors, the research shows you essentially have a coin flips chance at being recognized as more effective, right? You might actually become more effective, but unless people aren't seeing it, unless you're changing the dial on people's willingness to follow where it is that you're leading, you're not having much of an effect as a leader. So what stakeholder-centered coaching does is it says, leader, pick what it is that you want to get better at. Go to the stakeholders and say, how do I show improvement at being a clear, concise communicator? How do I show improvement at delegating more effectively? Take those suggestions, create an action plan, and tell them, hey, here is the new Brandon that you can expect to be working with. And by the way, if you don't see these behaviors, let me know. Hold me accountable. So by putting yourself out there in this way with such courage and to have such discipline to do it, also requires the balance of humility to be able to say, I haven't been doing this, and I'm probably going to drop the ball somewhere along the way. But when you involve those stakeholders, what you're doing is you are actively changing perceptions, and those perceptions morph into willingness to continue to follow where it is that you're leading your team, where it is that you're leading other teams, your peers, and your managers. So involving stakeholders is quite a critical piece of coaching. And I'd be curious here if anyone disagrees with that statement. Go to your chat, let us know.
Thank you, Brandon. And I really like that. And the way I see that is that Also, it is about coaching the whole ecosystem, because when the stakeholders are involved, it gives an opportunity for the leader to demonstrate that he is willing to be vulnerable in front of his stakeholders. That also shows his true leadership style. I mean, his brand as a leader goes very high, right? That from the leader's point of view. And also from the organization point of view, the perception that the leader is changing is also changing parallelly. I mean, while the leader is improving, and the perception is changing as well, which can have a very profound impact on the performance of the team. So I really like that. Frank, you want to add something to that as we wait for people to type in the chat box?
Yeah, just well, very quickly. See, I'll just speak for myself. In probably the first 8 years that I was doing what we now call stakeholder centered coaching, if someone asked me, well, what do you do for a living? Is I would say, well, I'm a coach. Oh, what kind of coach? Sports. I'd say no. Or are you a life coach? No. I work with leaders typically in large corporate settings, and I'm helping them become better leaders, improve, have a positive long-term change in their behavior. Now, even back then, we would maybe add the term as perceived by others, this whole perception change game. But what I didn't realize was that I was fully aware how hard it is to change habits. Do something new that you hadn't done before. Stop something that you've been doing. It's easy to understand how to change. It's very, very hard to do. What I didn't realize was the challenge for the stakeholders. That it's equally and in many cases harder for them to change because they're changing their opinion of this person. I mean, once you formed an opinion of another person, how stuck is that in your mind? And there's a technical term called confirmation bias. If someone's working to be a better listener, and all of a sudden, in the old days, they almost never listened. Now they're listening 50% of the time, which is a major change. You know what they only notice? All the times they're still not listening. That's confirming their opinion of this person. So, again, we start off this session talking about trust. You can be trusting and trustworthy, 95 times out of 100, but what do people really decide whether you're trustworthy? The 5 times in their eyes, you didn't act trustworthy. So it's a very hard thing for the stakeholders of what they're being asked to do. And so what I love about it, though, is that I don't go in and someone says, well, you're kind of expensive to just work with one leader to help them get better. And I would say, I'm not working with one leader. I'm changing the system. And the biggest outcome from everything we do is not the specific behavior change of the leader. It's the change in relationship between the leader and all of their stakeholders. So that's why we involve stakeholders.
Wonderful. Thank you. I really like that. So I really picked up from you, Frank. This is powerful. It is difficult to change the behaviors. And while it is so difficult, it is even more difficult to change the perception, right?
Exactly.
So once we have made a perception of somebody, we rarely change it, right? So that's why engaging stakeholders helps change their perceptions, because they see the leader changing, performing, doing things that he was not doing earlier throughout the year of engagement, and thereby their perception changes. Thank you. The next part that I had thought of when I perceived and conceived this webinar, the kind of question that I thought I'm going to ask both of you, which is like how important it is, to what extent offering the client no growth, no pay kind of a proposition, to what extent does that serve the credibility element or the trust element?
Well, it all stems back to Marshall Goldsmith when he was a young man and he was living he grew up poor, and he lived out in the wood with his parents. They were not wealthy, but they needed a new roof on their small little house, and they hired this guy. And poor Marshall was given to be his assistant. So on a hot summer days, he was up on the roof, bringing up shingles and taking off stuff and working hard. And at the very end, the guy walks out with Marshall's father. Marshall's right there and says, "Are you satisfied with this roof? Because if you're not, I'm not going to charge you any money." And by the way, Marshall knew this guy, the guy that was doing the roofing, was not a wealthy person. He needed the money, and Marshall never forgot that. So he's the one that created it. The results-based guarantee. If the leader doesn't improve, we don't get paid. And it's not a requirement in our coaching. Yet I I actually don't like to take an assignment. It's not a results-based guarantee. And I don't for a couple of reasons. The first reason is it gives me leverage. And the leverage I have is that I know categorically I will get paid if the leader follows up with their stakeholders. And I want the leverage of being able to quit. And so if I'm only going to get paid after a year, and I'm only going to get paid if this person gets better, if I see them not doing their proper follow-up, I threaten to quit. And this has happened to me twice. And the most prominent case was I was coaching the chief technology officer of one of the most well-known, biggest software companies in the world, reporting to a guy that at least at one point in time was the richest man in the world. And he was not following up with his stakeholders. So guess what? I threatened to quit. I said, if you don't, I wrote him a letter, an email. This is over the holidays, the end of the year holidays in our country was around Christmas. And the guy calls me up, exactly what I wanted to do. He says, are you quitting? And I said, it depends. It depends on whether or not you start every month checking with each one of your stakeholders one-on-one and ask them how you're doing. If you do that, I'm not quitting. If you're going to continue the way you're acting now, I'm quitting. Guess what? He started checking with his stakeholders.
Right.
I continued to coach him. And at the very end, he scored the lowest score possible for the coach to get paid. He got a 1.0 score on his mini survey, and I got paid. And by the way, the no one in the organization thought he would get better. And so I like that leverage. That's one reason why I like to do it. Another reason I like to do it is it shows how much you believe in your methodology and yourself as a coach, right? You're willing to bet on it. You know, and I'd say the final reason is, and this is just personal for Frank Wagner. You know, I've been at this game for a long time. It's kind of easy to rest on your laurels. You know, not put out all the work you should be doing as a coach. And it keeps me motivated to treat this person as if it's my first coaching engagement. So I stay very actively involved. I'm a cheerleader. I'm doing things to motivate them, because guess what? I have a wife who thinks this results-based guarantee is the stupidest thing that was ever invented by mankind, and I'm an idiot to do it. Yet, you know, so I've got to make sure I get a score of 1.0 or above. So that's why I like it.
Excellent. I really like this concept, and I really learned this new thing from you. It keeps the coach motivated, right? That's really powerful and brings a lot of credibility. Client is very happy to sign up because they know that if the results come, they don't mind paying for that, right? Definitely, I like that.
The other thing this is just a practical issue to get coaching. Is one of the biggest objections people have about hiring a coach is we don't have it in our budget. And what's nice about this is that whenever you're talking to that person, it's a results-based guarantee. It's got to be in next year's budget, so they can find the money now to pay you.
Right.
So I love that too.
Yeah. Okay, Brandon, over to you.
Yeah, the importance of the results guarantee, I think, are astronomical. You know, Frank has touched on the value that they give in terms of leverage during the engagement, but I especially appreciate the commercial proposition of it. You know, this idea that, yeah, of course it's not in the budget, but you need to have it next year is brilliant, Frank. I think this is the first I've come across that. But what it does, for me at least, is it makes what's typically an uncomfortable sales process, where there's a lot of self-promotion, there's self-evaluation and assessment by setting prices, you know, there's negotiation, there's a lot that goes into it, but the no growth, no pay guarantee makes it quite playful. You know, if they say, oh, that's really expensive, say, yeah, I know. Oh, we don't have the budget for that. I understand. Do you have the budget to have these leaders not get better? You know, it just makes the questions more quippy and humorous. And what I'm able to do in my sales process is just be lighthearted and be kind of fun about it. And I never take things too seriously when I use this. So I can use this as a method to take money off the table. And that's a huge objection when it comes to selling coaching, because it's such an opaque service proposition. right? Accounting is generally a fairly opaque proposition. The outcome is fairly known. My taxes will get done or I'll be prepared. Hiring a lawyer is fairly opaque. I'll get defense or offense, but there's no guarantee of outcome. So to be able to have this very, very nebulous service proposition with a very clear guarantee. And what I can tell you is that clients at the end of the day, they don't really care about your coaching. They care about their results. They don't care about your services. They care about their experience. They don't care about your services. They care about their return on investment. So to take all of that off the table by saying, hey, look, if this isn't exactly what I tell you that it is, if you agree that what I tell you I can achieve with these leaders, if that's what you want, and I can't give you exactly that, you won't pay me. Boy, does that make you stand out against the crowd of other coaches that they're looking at, as well as all the coaches they're hearing from. And then with the mini survey tool that we measure changes with, that is also a very powerful tool, because you can say, hey, I can do this for you just like I've done this for my past 5 clients. Here's the results that they've gotten. On a -3 to +3 scale, with 10 stakeholders, their average is a +2.5. That's pretty powerful. It's a lot more powerful than a qualitative, Brandon made me feel good. Brandon really understood my situation. No, Brandon helped me become recognized and acknowledged as a more effective leader. And hey, by the way, if I don't do the same for you, you're not going to pay me. It's a no-brainer for the organization. It's a no-brainer for the leader, purely from a financial perspective, of course. But that's the real power of it. It gives leverage in coaching, and it gives a great deal of leverage in sales and in marketing.
Thank you. That's excellent. I still have a few more questions to ask you guys, but we are running short of time. And I do want to open up the forum for Q&As. So friends, those of you, if you have any questions, feel free to type in the chat
open
box.
it up. Open it up.
Yeah, let's open it
10
up.
minutes.
Yes. So let's go on. Any questions, comments, observations, anybody wants to share?
Gautam was bringing up some good questions. Gautam, if you wouldn't mind, maybe finding out if we've landed on a resolution for you, if you still had questions from what you've put in the chat.
Right. And Brandon, since I noticed that you were responding to some of the questions, so would you like to bring up any particular question for the sake of the rest of the audience that is worth bringing up and share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's start with this question from Kalyani.
Okay.
Apologies if I've butchered the pronunciation. They wrote, other than the ideas shared so far, for someone who's a newly certified coach working towards certification and trying to establish his or her coaching practice, what recommendations, suggestions would you have to build credibility? I've got a number of ideas so far, but Frank, Inderjeet, anything you want to share with Kalyani?
Okay. Frank?
Well, the first thing I will say is I'll just go back to this last question. Don't do results-based guarantee or no growth, no pay when you're first getting started and you need to pay your mortgage. That's not the only way you develop your credibility. Right. Now, I think over time, you may add that methodology into what you're doing. Again, when you get started, it is hard because you're starting with the basis that there is no history of your coaching on that. I would suggest is, again, remember, character. Remember this whole thing about the person's character is, I would be very honest with the person. It's very important for us as coaches to model what we want our leaders to do. And you probably all know of our kind of magical rule of 3 of courage, humility, and discipline is make sure you are a shining example of those 3 things. And when it comes to the humility part is let them know, you're my first coaching engagement on this thing. So, I'm going to be working on this. But the thing is, I will always add is I'm following the methodology of the world's best leadership coach as recognized by Thinkers 50. And so what you're getting is the same process that Marshall goes with you. And it's much more about you and how you behave with your stakeholders of what's going to lead to the results. So really press more on being very honest, being very open, and by the way, doing a lot more checking in is how is this working for you?
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Brandon, I'm going to add a few things to the question you asked. Probably there are similar things as Frank said, but put in a different way, I would say. The most important part is results. As a beginner coach, you should choose the right kind of a client and focus on getting results for them. That is one thought I have for you. Second is try and build your brand. Like whatever coaching you do, get testimonials, see how can you showcase to the world that you are doing well and your clients are getting results. So bring that up, use more of that. And thirdly, what Frank also mentioned is that be mindful of your own evolution as a coach. So work with other coaches, continue to look at your process, the way you're coaching client. How do you want to improve further in bringing results? So as a new and a beginner coach, these are my 3 suggestions for you. 1, focus on clients' results. 2, focus on your own branding. Use whatever you can, whatever testimonials, whatever you can to brand yourself. Let the world know that you are doing a good job. And thirdly, continue to evolve and learn as a coach. So work with your buddy coaches and other coaches to learn and grow. So these are my thoughts.
Beautiful. So I'll give kind of a practical illustration of Inderjeet's first 2 points of focusing on branding and focusing on results. A real life example here. If I came to you, 2 people came to you, 2 different introductions, which of the 2 would you immediately give instant trust to their capabilities as a professional? So if person 1 comes and says, "Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm a management consultant. I work at Mergard, Wagner and Associates." And person 2 says, "Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm a management consultant with Tata Consultancy." Which of these 2 are you more likely to issue instant trust to? It's going to be person 2 because there's an affiliation with a brand that is steeped in creating great customer experiences. So what I did and what I encourage you to do and many other coaches have done is to affiliate with a brand that in your area, people are going to recognize and people are going to trust right away. That helps you overcome that first hurdle immediately. And now you're at the point where people are willing to get to know you. And this is where focusing on results is important. So there's some wonderful studies on shopping behaviors and how difficult it is at a shopping mall, for example, to get a consumer to make their first purchase. Once that seal is broken, they'll make their second purchase much faster, their third purchase much faster. All of the hurdles to buying have been broken by making that first purchase. And so this has 2 implications for you. The first is to break the seal of getting a client. Whoever it is, don't aim for the stars. Pick up your childhood best friend, your neighbor, the guy down the street that owns a mom and pop pet shop. Doesn't matter who it is. Get someone who wants to make some behavioral change in their life and has some people who hold a stake in that change and get to work on a pro bono basis. So that the next time a potentially paying client wants to work with you, you're not spending the whole time saying, "Here's what I do in theory." You're actually saying, "Here's what I do in practice. Here's been my experience. And here on the table is the mini survey of a client who has actually made measurable change using this process, which I can do for you." And then, of course, if you want to bring in no growth, no pay, you're welcome to. But I would say try to affiliate with a brand that is going to buy you instant trust. And number 2 is to focus on results by breaking the seal to get your first client. Take it pro bono, take the most modest, willing participant you can to get your reps in. And that way, when you do come to a proper client, you're not talking from theory, you're talking from practice, and you have real results to back it up. So I hope that what Frank and Inderjeet and I have shared will be valuable to you.
Of course. Thank you so much. And we have, definitely, Brandon, it's quite valuable. Giving an example, it really helps people connect. We are 2 minutes away from our time today. Do you think there is one more question we can take?
Yes, let me skim. We had such good interaction here. The point that Gautam was bringing up, and I think it's worth discussing. He said stakeholders can only give feedback about the change in behavior of a leader. Can the coach be judged on the basis of that? Because it's not about the efforts of the coach, but the efforts of the leader. And I was hoping Gautam could expound on this a bit.
Okay.
But I think what's important to note here is that stakeholders' feedback is important, but with extreme limitations. Feedback is important to get started, to make sure you're focusing on an important skill, leadership skill, and that skill should be important to the leader, important to their stakeholders, and important to the organization. This is triple alignment. If you don't have this, you're only running on 2 of your 3 potential legs. The second thing is stakeholders should give feed forward. So instead of saying, hey, you know what, Brandon, you said you were going to hold more effective meetings, but that last meeting was really ineffective. Boy, that doesn't feel good to give. That doesn't feel good to hear. Instead, we say, hey, Brandon, next time you hold a meeting, it would be great if you did these couple things. Oh, okay. So now the leader has a very narrow band of achievement. I do these specific things. I go back to that person. I say, hey, did I do these things? Did you see that? Yeah. Anything I should do different next time? No, go ahead and keep doing that. And now you've got a new habit. That habit is stakeholder centered. And that person is now watching each and every time to see your improvement. So when you come back for feedback the second time it's important at the end or at the halfway mark, you're getting a much more, rich data set, richer feedback from the stakeholders. So Gautam, I'd encourage you, if you have questions or want to discuss this further, just get in touch with us, coach@growmorecoach.com.
Yeah. And I just want to add a little different perspective to Gautam's question. I mean, the perception that when stakeholders are giving feedback and feed forward means that the coach doesn't have to do much work is wrong. As a coach, we do want to help the client, the leader who is getting coached, stay on course. So there's a lot of coach is still contributing. It's not that the entire feedback and feed forward is coming from the leader, from the stakeholders, and that's the only thing which is working, right? So Gautam, you can write to us if you need more information. But I thought you had this notion that if stakeholders are doing every work, then what's coach doing, right? So, well, we are definitely doing a lot of work there, and we can speak on that. Okay, great. Thank you, friends. I think we are just 1 minute over the time, and I think you have been a great audience. And I really want to thank you all from core of my heart for showing up. I am going to invite Frank and Brandon one by one to end, say the parting words, 30 seconds or maybe 15 seconds. Frank?
Sure. Well, yeah. Whilst they're getting ready, I'll just say what I think is one of the most important values we provide is managing our own egos. And I think a good stakeholder centered coach does that. It's not about the coach. And you know what? Who should get the credit? How do we earn our money? It's when the leader gets the credit and the stakeholders get the credit. Not, they hired Frank Wagner as a coach and paid him all this money and that's a wonderful thing. No, you want the leader to be seen as someone who cares about getting better as a leader, does the hard work and gets the credit for it. And guess what? And the stakeholders say, I added value and I was supportive and helpful and I feel good too. That's where I want the outcome to come, not me as a coach.
Thank you. Brandon.
Here we go. Thank you. I would say there's so many coaching skills that you can pick up. There's so much that you can learn about. Pick something that's really interesting to you and dive deep. And if you're interested in more about what we discussed today in terms of how you involve stakeholders, why you involve them, the roadblocks that may come up and how to blast through them, we have taken a significant portion of our coach certification training and put it into a sample course that you can get at no cost. I put the link in the chat. You're welcome to test it out. It's going to go through some of the philosophies, foundations, and the framework of stakeholder centered coaching. So Inderjeet, thanks for hosting the session. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brandon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, thank you.